Today, the Department of Justice is opening an investigation into whether the Baltimore Police Department has engaged in a pattern or practice of violations of the Constitution or federal law. This investigation will begin immediately and will focus on allegations that Baltimore Police Department officers use excessive force, including deadly force, conduct unlawful searches, seizures, and arrests, and engage in discriminatory policing.
The Justice Department just launching an investigation into the entire Baltimore Police Department after charges were filed against these 6 officers in the death of Freddie Gray. Niger Ennis says we just can't paint all police with the same brush, but Marjorie Clifton thinks that this investigation is critical. Marjorie, why?
Well, first of all, you have public opinion to deal with, and clearly there is a lot of unrest in Baltimore. And frankly, having good information doesn't hurt anyone. If it redeems the police force, then that gives them an out, and hopefully that'll ease some of the tensions. Or if it is there's a systemic issue within that Baltimore police force, it'll bring it to light and allow us to actually remedy the situation. So I think from a public image and also from a justice standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. You
know, Niger, when I hear that we make these kind of decisions based on public opinion, it could be a euphemism for mob rule. What's your opinion?
Oh, I think that's spot on, and I actually agree with Marjorie. I think this is largely done for public relations and political reasons. Look, the fact of the matter is, where do local officials have culpability and responsibility? Let us presume that there is a long-standing civil rights problem within a Baltimore Police Department that is a very significant black population within the Baltimore Police. Does not the mayor, or the former mayor, by the way, who's running for president of the United States and followed his mayoralty with being governor of the state of Maryland, where do these local officials have culpability and responsibility for what exists within their city?
You know, Marjorie, you have a city that, to Niger's point, has been run by a lot of black people for a long period of time, a lot of Democrats for a long period of time. Did this sort of rush to have the entire Baltimore Police Department be investigated? Where did this come from? Did all of a sudden these guys turn overnight, or were they led astray by black leaders and Democrats?
Well, I don't think this is actually a political thing. I think this has to do more with systemic issues we're dealing with nationwide. I mean, we're seeing issues with police forces around the country. We're seeing unrest in communities that do exemplify a racial divide. And I think there are a lot of people on all sides of this issue who are eager to remedy that and, frankly, understand and really look at what happens in terms of how we manage criminal justice and imprisonment and how we deal with police. And look, there is no question, studies out of Harvard and many other esteemed universities say there is implicit bias, and I think acknowledging what that is, justified or not, and how it impacts the way we police, how we hire, how we deal with race in the country, and I think it's important.
Well, let's bring in a New York City police detective, former Detective Pat Bronsden. I think you've heard mostly what Marjorie had to say.
Sure did.
There's an implicit bias. How do we deal with police? Obviously, it feels like the police are under a tremendous amount of fire. And it feels to a certain degree that they're being found guilty in a court of public opinion, or at least by some elected law officials. How does that make you feel?
Well, it doesn't make me feel good at all, Charles, especially when you examine it against verifiable facts. Marjorie's reference to implicit bias is actually implicitly false because the numbers defy it. If you look at the number of police shootings, just let's go into that very narrow, skinny subset. There was nine shootings by police in 2014. There was 41 10 years ago. So 9. All the numbers are way down. What happened here, and what Marjorie is referencing, in my view, is that this anti-police sentiment that's been raging because of the consequence of rhetoric, some of the rhetoric that was spewed here after the December 20th slaughter of Officer Lou and Ramos, that actually degenerates, it devolves, it disembowels the police to the extent that it infires and it inflames and emboldens the bad guys, which is why you have Brian Moore shot in the face in broad daylight.
And his funeral today, and
I was there.
God bless his soul. You know, guys, also in the middle of all this, we're going to talk about this because today we had the funeral service for New York City police officer Brian Moore. Thousands of policemen from across the country turning up. In fact, they turned parts of Long Island into a blue sea, a sea of blue. You can see it right there. At the same time in Washington, we're hearing about a new bill sponsored by 2 Democratic lawmakers. It will require that states hold mandatory sensitivity training for law enforcement officers annually, and that it would be conducted by certified instructors. So, Pat, you attended the funeral. What do you think about this? Would it actually be something that police could help the police in some way? Certainly, it'd be harder to lobby these or lob these charges at the police if they're getting all of this training and they're being there's so much oversight. But is it an insult?
I don't know that it's an insult, but I would certainly agree that it would help, even if only marginally it would help, and even if only, as you referenced, it would help in the court of public opinion. There's no downside to additional mandatory sensitivity training. Is it needed? Is it necessary? Is it a knee-jerk response to the viral nature of some of the anti-police sentiment that's been raging, right or wrong, false or unfalsely, throughout the nation?
Right.
It's kind of irrespective of that. So the short answer is absolutely. Why not?
The problem is not necessarily sensitivity training in and of itself. It's the context in which it comes to fruition. It is a context of a very viral, as the detective said, anti-police sentiment that seems to be generated from the likes of the president's go-to man on race relations with the police, Al Sharpton. And that is most unfortunate. Look, the story of the early part of this century should be the fact that cities like New York City, Washington, D.C., New York City in the 80s and 90s had a murder rate of up above 2,000 per year. Most of those people disproportionately were black and brown lives that were lost. The fact that it's been dramatically cut down by record numbers, that should be the story, and it should be a celebration of the police and the communities and where these lives have been saved.
Marjorie, what do you make of that? I mean, obviously, we've got these cameras out there. These kind of things, when they happen, they're probably more visible than ever before. But I don't know that it necessarily means that it's worse than it was before. Could this actually, all of these things that put the police under the microscope and almost make them seem guilty before proven innocent or otherwise, could it make things worse, Marjorie?
Well, you know, I think, again, there are no real winners in this. I mean, obviously, we have a vested interest as a public in seeing the police be effective and seeing them be protected. We look to them to protect us. And so it's not that we want to discredit them at all. In fact, it's the opposite. We want to make sure that it's a system that feels trusted, feels transparent. And look, absolutely, there is reason on both sides of this argument that police can feel afraid or that there may be bias in some communities. And I think what this is about a national conversation, and it's about structural how we deal with race relations between law enforcement and between communities. And I think as much as what we're talking about with this investigation and measures around sensitivity, it is to help police forces be more effective and for communities to trust them. And I think that's really important.
Marjorie Clifton, Niger Ennis, and Pat Bronson, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. You know, if the job market's improving, why is Hillary Clinton hurting? Why polls in a key state may have her campaign very worried. And you see this guy? A judge just let him go. More proof we can't close Gitmo.